Hello everybody and welcome back to my continuation of my book reading of Stephen King's Breeding Method, or The Breeding Method. And I am here at chapter 2 called McCarran's Story, The Breeding Method. Here we go. Most of you know the Harriet White Hospital, the building almost opposite of Madison Square Garden. It is named after Harriet White, my grandfather's first wife. She died before I was born, but there is a statue of her in front of the hospital building. If you have seen it, you may be surprised to learn that someone who looked so cold and stiff and unfeeling was a nurse. I was born inside that grey stone building on March 20th, 1900. I returned there as a young hospital doctor in 1926. Before this, I had been a doctor in France at the end of World War I. The Harriet White Hospital plays an important part in the story I am going to tell you. It is about something that happened in 1935. Birth, gentlemen, is an unpleasant thing to many people. These days, fathers are often there when their child is born, which seems to me to be a very healthy and sensible thing. But I have seen men leave the delivery room with white faces and sick stomachs after hearing the cries and seeing the blood. Birth is wonderful, gentlemen, but I have never found it beautiful. A woman's womb is like an engine. As the birth of her child gets nearer, the spread of that engine becomes faster, faster, louder and louder, and then finally, it's like the roar of a wild animal. Once that silent engine has been turned on, every mother understands that either she will bring that baby into the world or that engine will get louder and harder and faster until it bursts, killing her in blood and pain. This is a story of a birth, gentlemen. I tell it to you at Christmas when we remember that other birth which happened almost 2,000 years ago. I began to practice medicine in 1929, but it was in April 1935 that a young woman, I will call her Sandra Stansfield, came to see me. Her name is close enough to hear to her real name. She was a young white woman who says her age was 28. After examining her, I guessed her real age to be 4 or 5 years younger. She had fair hair and was about 5 feet 8 inches tall. She was quite beautiful, but with a cool look in her eye. She was intelligent and looked like the sort of person who got what they wanted from life. Something about the firm line of her mouth reminding me of Harriet White's statue outside the hospital. The name she put on her form was not Sandra Stanfield, but Jane Smith. My examination told me that she was about 2 months pregnant. She was not wearing a wedding ring. Jane Smith? My nurse said to me after the young woman was gone. That's not her real name. I agreed. But I liked the way she had given a simple name and not tried to think of a more complicated one, hoping that I would believe it was real. You need a name for your form, she seemed to be saying, because that is the law. So here's a name. Ella, my nurse, said something about modern girls and they don't care who knows. But she knew it was not like that. Jane Smith was a very serious young woman. It was difficult and unpleasant to be unmarried and pregnant at that time. But she intended to do her best for herself and her baby. She came back a week later. It was a wonderful spring day, a warm sun, blue sky, The sort of day when you wish you did not have to work or be responsible, but could sit on a beach by a warm sea, perhaps. Sit opposite a lovely woman of your own who looks as pretty as the day in a big white hat and a dress covered with flowers. Jane Smith's dress was white, but was still almost as pretty as the day. She wore brown shoes, white gloves, and a small round hat that was no longer quite the fashion. It was the first sign to tell me that she was not all a rich woman. "You're pregnant," I said. "You were almost sure of that, weren't you?" "If there are to be tears," I thought, "they will come now." "Yes," she replied calmly. There were no tears. "When will I deliver?" "It will be on Christmas. It will be a Christmas baby," I said. "The date I will give you is December 10th. But it may be 2 weeks before or after that." "All right." She was silent for a moment, then went on. "I'm not married. Will you deliver the baby?" "Yes," I said. "But you must do something first." Her face became more serious. It looked even more like the face of Harriet White. "And what is that?" she asked in a cool voice. "I must know your real name," I said. "You can continue to pay me in cash, and I can continue to give you a receipt in the name of Jane Smith. But if you are going to travel through the next 7 months together, I want to be able to call you by name you used during the rest of your life." I watched her. Was she going to thank me for my time and leave? I would be sorry if that happened. I liked her. And I liked the way she was managing a problem which caused more other women shame and embarrassment at that time. I suppose many young people today would find that sort of thinking quite stupid. But at that time, a married pregnant woman was a proud and happy woman, doing what God intended her to do. An unmarried pregnant woman was not so lucky. She was made to feel a deep and awful shame. She often went away to have her baby in another town or city, or to take pills or jump from a high building. Others got rid of their unwanted babies themselves or went to some butcher or a doctor to do the job. "All right," she said. "My name is Sandra Stanfield. I hope we can be friends." "I need a friend just now. I'm quite frightened." "I can understand that," I said. "I'll try to do my best to be your friend, if I can." "Miss Stanfield, is there anything I can do for you now?" She opened her bag and took out a pen and some paper. "I want to know the best things to eat, for the baby, I mean. I'll give you a little book for pregnant women. It tells you all about food and weight and drinking and smoking. Please don't laugh, but I wrote it myself." It was called A Guide to Pregnancy and Delivery. I was especially interested in pregnancy and birth. I still am, and I recall all the latest information on the subject. And because my opinions were strong and enthusiastic, I wrote my own book instead of just passing on the old tired advice given to young mothers then. There was a lot of it at the time, but I'll just tell you 2 things. Pregnant women were told to stay off their feet as much as possible and not to walk long distances. Not giving birth is hard work. Or now giving birth is hard work. And that sort of advice is telling a football player to prepare for a big game by sitting down as much as possible so that he doesn't get himself too tired. Another popular piece of advice given to pregnant women by many doctors was to start smoking, to keep down their weight. Smoking? I gave Miss Stansfield my little book and she looked at it for 5 minutes without speaking, but turning the pages. When she did look up, there was a small smile on her lips. "You are different, Dr. McCarran. Walking, swimming, vitamin pills for pregnant women, and breathing exercises? What breathing exercises?" I smiled back at her. "I'll tell you later on, if you will see my nurse, Mrs. Davidson." She'll arrange for you to come and see me again. Mr. Davison has not got a good opinion of me, she said. I'm sure that's not true, I said, but I've never been able to tell lies very well. The warm feeling between us suddenly disappeared. She walked to the door. Do you intend to keep the baby? I asked her. She turned and smiled. A secret smile which I am sure only pregnant women know. Oh yes, she said, and she went out the door. After that, I forgot all about her until the end of the day when Ella Davidson spoke about her. Your Miss Jean Smith did something strange after she saw you this morning, she said. I saw from the look on her face that her opinion of the young woman had changed. What was that? She said, how much will it cost for all my visits to Dr. McCarran, for delivery, and for the time I stay in the hospital? Can you add up the figures and tell me exactly? That was strange. This was 1935, remember? And Miss Stanfield seemed to be a woman on her own. Did she have a lot of money? I didn't think so. Did you do it? I asked. Miss Davison looked at me as if I was mad. Did I? Of course I did. And she paid it all in cash. The cash had surprised Miss Davison in a pleasant way, of course. It didn't surprise me. One day, which the Jean Smiths of this world can't do, is write checks. She took a bank book out of her bag, opened it, and counted the money. Out on to my desk. Miss Davison continued. Then she put her receipt into the bank book and put both book and receipt back into her bag. When you think of the way we have to chase some of the nice people to pay their bills. I know, I said, but I was not happy with the Stanfield woman for paying that way, and I was not happy with Miss Davison for being so pleased. And something about the whole thing made me feel small. How can she pay for her time in the hospital now? I asked. How long will she be in there? We don't know. Or can you suddenly see into the future, Ella? I told her that. How long is usual if everything goes well? She asked. I told her 3 days. Was I right, Dr. McCarran? I agreed with what she said. She said, I'll pay for 3 days, and if it's longer, I'll pay the extra money, and if it's shorter, we can give her back some money. I finished. She was a brave woman. I could not deny that. Mrs. Davison's smile seemed to show that she agreed. A month went by and Mrs. Stanfield came again. She wore a blue dress which looked fresh and pretty. Her shoes did not match it. They were the same brown ones she had worn before. I examined her carefully and saw that everything was alright. I told her this, and she was pleased. I discovered the vitamin pills which you suggested, Dr. McCarran. Oh, did you? That's good. She smiled a cheeky smile. The chemist advised me not to take them. He thought it was odd because vitamins for pregnant women are a new idea. I told her, did you take his advice? No, I took yours. You're my doctor. Well, thank you. Her look became serious. Dr. McCarran, when will it begin to show that I'm pregnant? Oh, not until August, September, if you choose the right clothes. Thank you. She picked up her bag, but did not immediately get up to go. She seemed to want to talk, but didn't know where to begin. Are you a working woman? I asked. She nodded. Yes, I work. Can I ask where? In a large shop. What other job can an unmarried woman do in the city? I sell clothes to fat ladies who color their hair. I smiled. How long will you continue? Until somebody knows that I'm pregnant and have no wedding ring. Then they'll ask me to leave before the fat ladies become shocked and begin to complain. Quite suddenly her eyes were bright with tears. I put my hand in the pocket for a handkerchief, but the tears didn't fall. Not a single one. Her lips became tight, then smooth again. She simply decided to control her feelings, and she did. I'm sorry, she said. You've been very kind to me. I won't tell you my very ordinary, boring story. She stood up. I can listen, I said, and I have some time. No, she said, thank you, but no. Alright, I said, but there's another thing I want to see. Yes? I never ask people to pay for all their visits before they have them made them. I hope if you feel you want to or have to. I stopped, uncertain what to say next. I've lived in New York 4 years, Dr. McCarran, and I'm careful with my money. After August or September, I'll have to live on the money I've saved until I can go back to work again. I don't have a lot of money, and sometimes at night, I become frightened. She looked at me with those wonderful brown eyes. It seems better to pay for the baby first, because that's where the baby is in my thoughts. It's better if the money is with you, so that I can spend it later, when things get difficult. Alright. But please, tell me if you need it, I said. Do you intend to work as long as possible? Yes, I have to. Why? I think I'm going to frighten you a little bit before you go, I said. Her eyes opened wider. Don't do that, she said. I'm frightened enough already. Please, I said, sit down again. After a moment she sat down on the chair. Things are very difficult for you, I said. And you are managing them very well. She began to speak, but I stopped her. That's good. But I don't want to see you hurt your baby because you feel you need more money. There was a woman who did not take my advice. She pushed and packed herself into tight clothes, which became tighter and tighter each month. She was a silly woman who did not want people to notice that she was pregnant. I don't believe she really wanted the baby. Some people might say she was trying to kill it. And did she? Miss Stanfield's face was very still. No, but the baby was born with damaged brain. Now, it may not have been the woman's foolish way of dressing that damaged the baby, but we can't be sure. I understand, she said. Quietly. You don't want me to pack myself in so that I can work another month or 6 weeks. I didn't think about it, so thank you for frightening me a little. I walked to the door with her. How much or how little money had you saved? How much is left? I want to ask her these things, but I knew that she would not answer them, so I said goodbye. I learned her story a little bit at a time over the next 6 months. She came to the city from a small town in Iowa or Nebraska. I don't remember now. She wanted to be an actress. She came to New York because she didn't believe the magazine stories that said any girl going to Hollywood could become a film star. And I think she thought that the theater was more interesting than the film business. She got a job in one of the large shops and joined an acting school. She was clever. She worked hard, but she was lonely, very lonely. Lonely in a way that only single girls from small towns can understand. There was a young man in her acting school. The two of them went out together several times. She did not love him, but she needed a friend. By the time she discovered that he was not that, she was pregnant. She told the young man, and he said he was going to do the right thing and marry her. A week later, he was gone from the place where he lived. He left no other address. That was when she came to me. During her 4th month, I introduced Miss Stanfield to the breeding method, what is today called the Lamaze method. In those days, Monsieur Lamaze was still not known. 45 years ago, a visit to the living rooms in a large American hospital sounded like a visit to a madhouse. Women crying, women screaming that they wanted to be dead, women screaming for God to help them, women screaming out words which their husbands and fathers did not realize they knew. All this was quite usual, although most of the world's women give birth in almost complete silence, except for the sort of sounds made by anyone doing a hard job of work. Doctors were responsible for some of this madness, I am sorry to say, and so were the stories a pregnant woman heard from friends and relations who had given birth. Believe me, if you are told that something is going to hurt, then it will hurt. Most pain is in the mind, and when a woman has been told by her mother, her sisters, her married friends, and her doctor that woman is ready and waiting to feel pain. I read a lot about the subject of pregnancy. While doing this, I discovered the idea of a silent birth and the breathing method. A method of giving birth which helped the mother use her breath in a more useful way than by screaming. It was used in India and Africa at that time, but most doctors in the West were not interested in it. One doctor, an intelligent man, returned my little book with a red line through the part about the breathing method. He wrote a note beside it saying that it was dangerous rubbish, while I didn't take out the part about the breathing method. Some women used it and succeeded. Others understood the idea but discovered that they could not use it when they came to give birth. But these were often women who were told by friends and relations that the idea could not work. A woman using the breathing method begins with a number of short, regular breaths when she feels a contraction coming on. Later, when the more painful contractions start coming every 15 minutes, the woman changes her breathing to long breaths, like a long distant runner at the end of a long run. When the birth is very close, the woman changes her breathing again. Today it's often called the choo-choo way of breathing. When the woman takes and lets out short, sharp breaths between her lips. It really does sound like a child pretending to be a steam train. All of this helps the mother's body, but also helps her mind. She feels she is helping and guiding her baby into the world. She feels on top of the pain. Miss Stanfield was the perfect person for the breathing method. She had no friends or relations to frighten her. She believed in it. I will practice, Dr. McCarran, she said. And she did. She also found it helped her in other ways, like the day she finished working at the shop. It came at the end of August when, quite suddenly, her body began to show that she was pregnant. She came to see me on the first day of September. I've discovered that the breathing method is useful for other things, she said, smiling. What's that? I asked. It's better than counting up to 10 when you're angry with someone, she said. Although people do look at you as if you're mad when you start choo-chooing. She told me the tale. I went to work last Monday, she explained, and my boss, Mrs. Kelly, asked to see me in her office. She was always quite friendly before. She used to show me photos of her teenage sons and was always asking me if I had met a nice boy. But when I stepped into her office that day, I knew everything had changed. You're in trouble, she said in an unfriendly voice. Yes, I said. Some people call it that. Don't be clever with me, young lady, she said. When I look at your stomach, I can see you've been too clever already. Have you no shame about the way you've tricked me? I haven't tricked you, I told her. You didn't ask me if I was pregnant. How can you say that I tricked you? I took you home. Miss Kelly said to me, you had dinner with my sons. This was when I began to get angrier than I've ever been in my life. Are you suggesting that I was thinking of tricking your sons into making love to me? If you are, that's the dirtiest thing I have ever heard in my life. Her head fell back as if I hit her. Her face went white. Then she pulled a checkbook out of her desk. With hundreds of nice girls looking for jobs in the city, I don't think we need a girl like you working for us, dear. It was the final dear that made me so angry that I wanted to scream and throw things around the room. I didn't just think about throwing things, I saw myself doing it. I was going to do it. Nothing was going to stop me. But then I remembered the breeding method. I began to choo-choo. It was all I was able to think of doing. Slowly, I became calm again, and I was able to take that check. I couldn't thank her, of course. I was too busy choo-chooing. Miss Stanfield finished telling her tale, and we laughed about it together. I don't feel angry now, she said. In fact, I feel quite sorry for Mrs. Kelly. Her smile disappeared, and she opened her bag. Can I show you something which I've bought, Dr. McCarran? Yes, if you want to, I said. She took a small flat box from her bag. I bought it for $2. It's the only time I felt ashamed and dirty. Isn't that strange? She opened the box and put it on my desk. Inside was a plain gold wedding ring. I wasn't surprised. I'll do what is necessary, she said. I have a room in a house, and the lady who owns the house has been very kind and friendly, but I think she'll ask me to leave soon. Where will you go? There's a place down in the village, a room on the 3rd floor. It's clean, and it's $5 a month, cheaper than the room I have now. She took the ring out of the box. I wore this when the owner of the building shows me the room. She puts it on the 3rd finger of her left hand. There. Now I'm Mrs. Stanfield. My husband is a lorry driver who was killed driving from Pittsburgh to New York. Very sad. But I am not an unmarried pregnant woman anymore, with no father's name to give to my child. A cheap little ring has changed that. Like magic. Cheap magic. She looked up at me, and there was tears in her eyes. As I watched, one of them fell slowly down her cheek. Please, I said. I reached across the desk to take hold of her hand. If you need help, is there anything I can do? Slowly, she took her hand away. I did not love her, gentlemen. But in that moment, I could have loved her. You're a good, kind man, and you've done a lot for me. And my baby, she said. And your breeding method is a much better sort of magic than this awful ring. She left soon after that, and I went to the window to watch her walk down the street towards Madison Avenue. She looked so small, so young, but so proud of being pregnant. I turned back to my desk. There was a photograph on the wall, and without thinking, I looked at it, and suddenly began to shake. My skin became ice cold, and the most terrible feeling of fear filled my whole body. I did not seem to be able to breathe. What happened? I saw into the furniture. I saw into the future, gentlemen. That's what happened. I won't argue about whether or not this is possible. I know it is, because it happened to me that hot September afternoon when I looked at that photograph. The photograph was taken by my mother on the first day I was able to call myself a doctor. It showed me standing opposite the hospital. I was smiling and looked pleased with myself. To my left stood Harriet White's statue, with the same cold, unfeeling look on the woman's face that is there today. Not quite 4 months later, at the foot of that statue of my grandfather's first wife, Sandra Stanfield died. She died in an accident that happened just as she arrived at the hospital to deliver her baby. She was a little worried during that autumn. She was afraid that I was going away for the Christmas holidays and might not be there when her baby arrives. She was afraid that her baby was going to be delivered by some doctor who would not let her use the breeding method. I tried to tell her that I had no family to visit, that I was not leaving the city. Are you lonely? Are you ever lonely? She asked. Sometimes. Usually I keep too busy. Now, take this. I wrote down my house telephone number on some paper and gave it to her. You can always phone me here. Oh no, I couldn't. Do you want to use the breeding method? Or do you want to get some doctor who will think you're mad when you start to choo-choo. She smiled a little. Alright. The autumn passed and she was asked to move out of her room. She moved to the one she had seen in the village, and she got work for 2 days each week. A blind woman paid her to clean her house and to read to her. But I knew something was worrying her. She looked healthy, but there was a shadow over her face. Sometimes she was slow to answer my questions, and once she didn't answer at all. I looked up to see her staring at a photograph on my wall with a strange, dreamy look on her face. That ice-cold feeling came over my skin again. And her next words did nothing to warm me. I have a feeling, Dr. McCarran, sometimes quite a strong feeling that something terrible is going to happen to me. Yes, I feel that too. Those were the words which came to my lips. But instead of seeing them, I told her that she was not the first pregnant woman to feel that way. She was looking at the photograph again. Who is that? She asked. Emmeline McCarran, I said, trying to make a joke out of it. When she was quite young. No, I recognize you, of course, she said. The woman. Who is the woman? Her name is Harriet White, I said, and thought, and her stone face will be the first face you will see when you arrive to deliver your child. The ice-cold feeling came back again. That night I had the worst dream of my life. In the dream I opened my office door and saw Sandra Stanfield standing there. She was wearing the brown shoes, the white dress, the small hat that was no longer in fashion. But the hat was between her breasts, because she was carrying her head in her arms. The white dress had blood on it. More blood burst out of her neck and onto the ceiling. And then her eyes opened, those wonderful brown eyes, and she stared at me. Something terrible. The speaking head told me, "It's cheap magic, but it's all we have." That's when I woke up screaming. I examined her on 17th December. The baby will almost certainly come before the end of the year, I told her, but probably after Christmas. She did not seem as worried as she had been during the autumn. Miss Gibbs, the blind woman, was telling her friends about this young woman whose husband had died in an accident, who was going to have a baby. She is a brave young woman, the blind woman told her friends, and several of them were thinking about giving Mrs. Stanfield some work after the birth of her baby. I'll take the work too, she told me, for the baby, but only until I can find something better. The worst part of everything that's happening is that look at people differently. Sometimes I think to myself, how can you sleep at night when you know that you've tricked that dear old lady? And then I think, if she knew my true story, would she let me work for her? And the answer is no. Before she left that day, she took a small box from her handbag. It was covered with Christmas paper. I watched the shy way that she pushed it across the desk to me. "Merry Christmas, Dr. McCarran," she said. There was no need to buy me anything, I said, but I opened a drawer of my desk and took out a box of my own. But I did too. She was surprised and looked at me for a moment. Then we laughed together. Her present for me was a tie pin. The present for her was a book to put photographs of her baby in. I still have the tie pin. What happened to the photograph book? I don't know. I walked with her to the door. As we reached it, she turned to me, put her hands on my shoulders, kissed me on the mouth. Her lips were cool and firm. It was not a lover's kiss, gentlemen, but neither was it a kiss you might receive from a sister or an aunt. "Thank you again, Dr. McCarran," she said. There was color in her cheeks and her brown eyes were shining. "Thank you for everything." I laughed, a little worriedly. "You speak as if we'll never meet again, Sandra," I said. It was the second and last time I ever used her first name. "Oh, we'll meet again," she said. "I don't doubt that." And she was right. Although neither of us knew the terrible things that were going to happen at that meeting. At 6 p.m. on the evening before Christmas Day, Miss Stanfield's contractions began. Snow had fallen all that day, but now the snow had changed into icy rain. During the next 2 hours, the city streets slowly became dangerous with ice. At 6:30 p.m., Miss Stanfield went carefully downstairs to the blind woman's apartment and knocked at the door. "Can I use your phone?" she asked. When the woman opened the door, "Is it the baby, dear?" Mrs. Gibbs asked. "Yes. The contractions have only just begun, but the weather is bad. It will take a taxi a long time to get to the hospital." Miss Stanfield made a telephone call, then phoned me. At that time, 6:40, the pains were coming every 25 minutes. She repeated to me that she was leaving the hospital early because of the weather. "I don't want to have my child in the back of a taxi," she said. She sounded very calm. The taxi was late, and Miss Stanfield's contractions were coming quicker than I thought they would. The taxi driver saw that she was going to have a baby. "Be careful, lady," he asked as he helped her down the snowy-covered steps. Miss Stanfield just nodded. She was busy with her deep breathing as a fresh contraction came. Later on, Mrs. Gibbs told me that the taxi driver was more nervous than poor dear Sandra, and that probably helped to cause the accident. The other thing that helped to cause it was almost certainly the breathing method itself. The driver drove carefully through the ice streets. His taxi joined lines of other slow-moving traffic as it made its way through several crossroads that were partially covered with deep snow. Slowly, the taxi got closer to the hospital. The driver was not badly hurt in the accident, and I talked to him afterwards in the hospital. He said that he knew that the sound of Miss Stanfield's deep breathing coming from the back seat made him nervous. Many times he looked into his mirror to see if she was dying or something. He said that he wished she had shouted or screamed the way a woman having a baby was supposed to do. He asked her if she was feeling alright, and she only nodded, continuing to breathe deeply the way that she was practicing. 2 or 3 streets from the hospital, the contractions started to come more quickly. An hour had passed since she had entered the taxi because of the slow-moving traffic. The driver noticed the change in the way she was breathing. She had started to choo-choo, and it made him even more nervous. At that moment, the driver saw a hole open up in the traffic that was crossing in front of them. As he waited, he immediately went through it like a bullet from a gun. The way to the hospital was now clear. "I could see the statue of that woman," he told me afterwards. He wanted to hurry to the hospital. He wanted to get rid of the choo-chooing pregnant passenger. He made the taxi go faster, but the tires could not hold on the ice on the road. I had walked to the hospital and was climbing the steps to the front door when the taxi arrived. I did not know that the roads were so dangerous, that the taxi had taken all that time to get there. I believed I was going to find Miss Stanfield inside, in bed, waiting for me. I turned just in time to see the accident happen. An ambulance was coming from the side of the hospital, as Miss Stanfield's taxi came across the square towards the hospital building. The taxi was going too fast to stop. The driver tried to stop it, but the wheels began to do their own crazy dance on the ice. The red light on the top of the ambulance threw a blood-colored light over the taxi, and I saw the face of Sandra Stanfield. Without one moment, it was the face in my dreams. The same bloody open-eyed face that I had seen on the head in her arms. I shouted her name, took 2 steps down, and fell. I hit my elbow on the ground but managed to hold on to my black doctor's bag. I saw the rest of the accident from where I was lying on the ground. The ambulance tried to stop. Its wheels too were not able to hold a straight line on the ice. It turned around in a half circle, and the back of the ambulance hit the bottom of a Harriet White statue. A young woman who was near screamed and tried to run as the ambulance and taxi came towards each other. She fell on her stomach and her handbag flew out of her hand. The taxi turned all the way around. I was now traveling backwards. I could see the driver clearly. He was trying to control the car but was not succeeding. The ambulance came off the statue and crashed into the taxi. The car turned around once in a small circle and hit the bottom of the statue, hard. One of his lights was broken and went off like a bomb. The left side of the taxi was pushed into itself as if it was an old newspaper. A moment later, I saw that the taxi had hit the statues hard enough to tear it in two. Pieces of glass fell on to the ice like diamonds. Miss Stanfield was thrown through the back, right side window of the taxi. I was on my feet again and I ran down the icy steps. She was lying in the shadow of a Harriet White statue, 20 feet from the ambulance and its blood-red roof light. The ambulance was on its side. There was something wrong with Miss Stanfield's body. What was it? Am I being honest, gentlemen? I am being honest, gentlemen, when I see that I did not know until my foot hit something, and I nearly fell over again. I had kicked the thing several feet away. It was marked with blood, and there was glass on it. But it was a fair hair which I recognized. The thing I had kicked into the side of the road was her head. It was cut off in the accident, moving as if I was in some horrible dream. I reached her body and turned it over, I think. I tried to scream. If I did, no sound came out. I could not make a sound. You see, gentlemen, the woman was still breathing. Her chest was moving up and down in quick, shallow breaths. I could hear the little screams of air being pulled out into her body, then pushed out again. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I fell on my knees next to her over the ice, one hand at my mouth. A moment later, I saw fresh blood coming through the bottom parts of her dress, and I saw something moving there. Suddenly, I became sure there was a chance of saving the baby. Cheap magic, I shouted into the night, and I believe that as I pulled her dress to her waist, I began laughing. I believe I was mad. Her body was warm. I remember that. I remember the way it moved with her breathing. The ambulance driver walked over like a man who was drunk. He had one hand on the side of his head and blood came through his fingers. Cheap magic, I screamed again, still laughing. My hands were on her stomach. The ambulance driver stared down at Sandra Stanfield's body, a body without a head. His eyes opened wide. I don't know if he realized that the body was still breathing. Stop staring at her, give me a blanket, I shouted at him. He walked away, but not back towards the ambulance. He just walked off into the snowy night and I never saw him again. I turned back to the dead woman. who was not dead yet. Who was not yet dead. And then she took off my overcoat. I lifted her up and put the coat under her. I could hear the choo-choo breathing from that. The body without a head. I still hear it sometimes, gentlemen, in my dreams. Please understand that all of this happened in a very short time. It just seemed longer to me. People were beginning to run out of the hospital. Behind me, a woman screamed as she saw the head at the side of the street. I pulled open my black bag and took out a short knife. I opened it, cut through the clothes on the lower part of her body, and pulled them off. A voice behind me said, "What can I do, doctor?" It was a nurse. Her face was as white as milk. "You can give me a blanket," I told her. "There is still a chance of saving the baby." Behind her, I saw about 20 people from the hospital standing on the steps. They did not want to come any closer. How much did they see? I don't know, but people kept away from me for days afterwards, and some forever. And no one ever spoke to me about it. The nurse was hurrying back towards the hospital. "Nurse," I said, "there's no time for that. Get one from the ambulance. This baby is coming now." I turned back to Miss Stanfield. Her choo-choo breathing was faster and faster, and then I saw the baby's head. And then it came. It almost flew into my hands. It was a boy. "Nurse, where are you?" I shouted. The baby cried a thin cry, and hands waved weakly in the cold air. Steam came off its body, but then it stopped breathing. I pressed my mouth against its face and breathed into its mouth until the child began to breathe on its own again. The nurse was there with the blanket. I held out my hand for it. She started to give it to me, then stopped. "Doctor, what if it's not quite human?" "Give me that blanket," I said. "Give it to me now, nurse, before I kick you up those hospital steps." "Yes, doctor," she said calmly and gave me the blanket. I put it around the child and gave it to her. "If you drop him, nurse, I'll make sure you have no job tomorrow." "Yes, doctor." "It's cheap magic, nurse, but it's all that God's left us with." "Yes, doctor." I watched her half walk, half run back to the hospital with the child. Then I stood up and moved away from the body. Its breathing stopped. Started again. Stopped. I moved back away from it and my foot hit something. I turned around. It was her head. I bent down and turned the head over. The eyes were open, those brown eyes, which had always been so full of life. Gentlemen, she was seeing me. Her teeth were biting together, her lips were part open, her eyes moved to the left that she could see me better. Her lips opened wider. She said 4 words. "Thank you, Dr. McCarran." I heard them, gentlemen. "It's a boy, Miss Stanfield," I said. Her lips moved again. Then came the thin, ghastly sound. "Boy." Her eyes were looking beyond me now, perhaps into that black, snowy sky. Then they closed. It was over. I looked up at the statue of Harry White, and there she stood. Her stone face stared out as if nothing important had happened. I stayed there, on my knees, next to the head, and began to cry. I was still crying when 2 nurses and young hospital doctor helped me on to my feet and inside. And that was the end of chapter 2. This was a very long chapter, almost a good 50 minutes. Yeah, there were a lot of pages. So, hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening to this long segment of chapter 2. There's gonna be one more segment that will come in the next couple of days. Chapter 3, The Club, and that will be the last chapter of this book of the breeding method. Again, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.